Hello, my name is Wendy Dixon, and thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you today on this amazing topic of the Four Noble Truths and deep listening. Why is an understanding of the Four Noble Truths so essential to Theosophists walking on the path? As we investigate this question through the medium of the two great works of Madame Blavatsky, The Voice of the Silence and The Secret Doctrine, we inevitably arrive at the conclusion that truth, with a capital T, belongs to far higher planes than our earthly existence. As we strive to be able to listen to the voice of the silence, the small, still voice of the spiritual consciousness enshrined in the hearts of all beings, we become aware that the immense arc of evolution that is our pilgrim journey has to be fully experienced at all levels. No entity, HPB says, whether angelic or human, can reach the state of nirvana or of absolute purity except through eons of suffering and the knowledge of evil as well as of good, as otherwise the latter remains incomprehensible. This hall of sorrow, our earth, the densest planet in our planetary scheme or chain, the fulcrum of all that has been and all that will be in our evolution. It is the densest matter, so dense that our eyes and ears are not capable of seeing and hearing any finer grade material. Hence, we identify ourselves with this dense matter, with our body and the physical plane, and are subject to the illusion of separateness. This illusion of separateness, the great heresy, says HPB. Yet the occultists regard physical nature as a bundle of the most varied illusions on the plane of deceptive perceptions, recognize in every pain and suffering but the necessary pangs of incessant procreation, a series of stages towards an ever-growing perfectibility, which is visible in the silent influence of never-erring karma or abstract nature. Woe to those who live without suffering, she continues. Stagnation and death is the future of all that vegetates without a change. And how can there be any change for the better without proportionate suffering during the preceding stage? Is it not those only who have learnt the deceptive value of earthly hopes and the elusive allurements of external nature who are destined to solve the great problems of life, pain, and death? The voice of the silence invites us, rather extols us, to listen to the incessant crying of the world. Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning, commands the voice of the silence. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself hast wiped it from the sufferer's eye. Here are two descriptions of dukkha, sometimes translated as suffering or sorrow, from HPB. The four truths, or the four dogmas, which are 1, dukkha, or that misery and pain are the unavoidable concomitants of sentient, esoterically physical existence. From the great Theravadan monk Thich Nhat Hanh, in his story of the Buddha's life, Old Path, White Clouds, the Buddha tells us, brothers, there are four truths: the existence of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. The first is the existence of suffering. Birth, old age, sickness, and death are suffering. Sadness, anger, jealousy, worry, anxiety, fear, and despair are suffering. Separation from loved ones is suffering. Association with those you hate is suffering. Desire, attachment, and clinging to the 5 aggregates are suffering. Having passed through the previous halls, we step into the hall of sorrow, now able to listen with an honest, unobstructed awareness, to listen with ears that do not judge, with ears that do not attempt to fix anything, with ears that do not bypass the cries, the lamentations of those wandering in the vale of tears. Yet, it is our tears that are the vehicle by which we attain Buddhahood. When we allow them to drop into our hearts and remain there until the sorrow and suffering that caused those tears is eradicated. The voice of the silence further adds, "These tears, O thou of heart most merciful, these are the streams that irrigate the fields of charity immortal. 'Tis on such soil that grows the midnight blossom of Buddha, adeptship, the blossom of Bodhisattva." How do we hold this sorrow in our hearts? We can only hold the suffering in our hearts in the knowledge that there is indeed no separation of self and other. When the ego, the separated I, is dominant, then suffering can only crush us. When we slowly begin to see with eyes and listen with ears that realize our essential nature, then our response becomes one of service, one of dedication to the relieving of suffering for all. As well as the emphasis on arousing bodhicitta for the sake of all beings, Tibetan Lamrin categorizes beings according to 3 levels of spiritual capacity. Atisha describes the 3 levels in the following verses, 3 to 5, from Lamp for the Path of Awakening. Those who strive by any means to gain only the pleasures of samsara for themselves alone, such people are called lesser individuals. Those who turn their backs on worldly pleasures and avoid any harmful actions, striving for peace for themselves alone, such individuals are said to be intermediate. Those who long to put a complete end to all the sufferings of others through the sufferings of their own experience, individuals such as these are supreme. The voice of the silence allows no uncertainty. It addresses us as students of the 3rd level of spiritual capacity. This rewards us with freedom from rebirth, as the inner life becomes the only life, beyond matter and even beyond consciousness. Suffering is the great teacher, the great balancer of karma, and the great nourisher of compassion. HBB writes eloquently in The Secret Doctrine, "The ever unknowable and incognizable karana, compassion, alone, the causeless cause of all causes, should have its shrine and altar on the holy and ever untrodden ground of our heart, invisible, intangible, unmentioned, save through the small, still voice of the spiritual consciousness. Those who worship before it ought to do so in the silence and the sanctified solitude of their souls, making their spirit the sole mediator between them and the universal spirit, their good actions the only priests, and their sinful intentions, the only visible and objective sacrificial victims to the presence. To conclude this section, suffering becomes wisdom and compassion when it is heard without resistance. The second noble truth teaches us that our desires, our attachments, our aversions are all created by the mind. How do we learn to deep listen beneath the noise of our desires and thoughts? Thich Nhat Hanh continues from Old Path, White Clouds. Brothers, the second truth is the cause of suffering. Because of ignorance, people cannot see the truth about life, and they become caught in the flames of desire, anger, jealousy, grief, worry, fear, and despair. And HPB writes, the second dogma is samudaya, the truism that suffering is intensified by human passions. There are two basic methods used to change our attachment and aversion patterns. The first is to attack the pattern we wish to change. This is hardly efficient. Aggression habitually strengthens the pattern we wish to eradicate, ensuring that the battle becomes guerrilla warfare, with the seemingly suppressed pattern burying itself deeper into our psyches. The recommended method is instead transmutation, the deliberate focus of the mind on the antidote or balancing pattern. HPB clearly states, the best remedy for evil is not the suppression, but the elimination of desire. And this can best be accomplished by keeping the mind constantly steeped in things divine. Desire nothing, says the voice of the silence. Chafe not at karma, nor at nature's changeless laws, but struggle only with the personal, the transitory, the evanescent, and the perishable. Further we read, we have entered the path, the fourth path out of the 5 paths of rebirth, which lead and toss all human beings into perpetual states of sorrow and joy. These paths are but the subdivisions of the one, the path followed by karma. End quote. We can train to accept the balancing of our karmic debts, the ripening of our karma, as the Buddhists describe it. We can learn to desire nothing, because the desiring only creates more karma to be rebalanced. We can learn to become less reactionary in order that, quote, our vices become impotent, end quote. We can find and practice the moral and ethical codes in our religious practices that encourage these behaviours. There cannot be any resentment for the lessons which the law of karma presents to us in our lives. Deep listening implies that we listen closely to our own hearts and minds to discern what is impermanent, what is illusory, and to understand that all experience is an opportunity for growth. As we become more and more comfortable with this knowledge of the impartial and dispassionate action of karma, then we are able to follow HPB's injunction. Silence thy thoughts and fix thy whole attention on thy master, whom yet thou dost not see, but whom thou feelest. Our grave error is not only listening to our transitory worldly thoughts and emotions, but believing that they represent the truth. Even the act of grasping at the truth of the path is an error because it implies gaining something that was not there before. One Buddhist analogy is that of the sky and the clouds. The sky is the sky, regardless of whether there are no clouds, a few clouds, many clouds, or an immense storm. The sky does not react to the clouds. The sky remains unperturbed by the clouds passing through it. In the same manner, we can see the sky as our true self, our highest self, and the clouds as our thoughts. The thought clouds can range from little wispy, fleeting thoughts that have little substance to the major Category 5 storms that affect so badly everything below and within them. Yet, the sky is unchanged. Believing that our thoughts represent the truth is like believing that the sky is the clouds. We grasp at the thoughts as if they truly exist. We base our behavior upon the belief that the clouds are permanent and unchanging. The mind is indeed the great slayer of the real. The mind is not evil in itself, merely constrictive. It slays by limiting the infinite. To quote Sri Ramana Maharshi, the mind is consciousness that has put on limitations. We are extolled to realize that identification with our mind is sustaining illusion, is sustaining the belief that the clouds are the sky. The universe is an illusion, and so are you, says Shankara. However, the real exists. The sky is unperturbed by the clouds. Swami Vivekananda says, realize all this as illusion. Realize that within the illusion is the real. The Dhammapada reminds us again and again that understanding illusion and the real explains why suffering is and why one should turn away from suffering. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. Dhammapada 277. What is meant by conditioned? Anything that is constructed, produced, and or fabricated by the mind. In other words, everything that we perceive with our five senses, everything that we feel as a result of those perceptions, everything that we then construct to make sense of those perceptions, the labels we attach to things and events, and the memories that we produce to enable us to interact safely with the physical world around us. Yet we are now observing that these conditioned things have no inherent existence. They are, quote, as transient as autumn clouds, end of quote. The Lalita Vistara Sutra. Continuing with the short quote from the sutra, to watch the birth and death of things is like looking at the movement of a dance. The original quote is actually considering our transitory human lives, but it applies equally to the lives of all things in our physical existence and beyond. To close this section, we finish with a quote from the Voice of the Silence. Withhold thy mind from all external objects, all external sights. Withhold internal images, lest on thy soul light a dark shadow they should cast. Thou art now in dharana. Becoming the path, deep listening as cessation and compassionate action. HPB describes becoming the path as, quote, They have become one star, the fire that burns but scorches not, the fire which is the upadi of the flame. End of quote. We have learnt to see and hear with our eyes closed and our ears shut, to smell and taste with our mouths and nostrils stopped. Now we must learn at an even deeper level the cessation of all identification with thoughts and emotions. We have acknowledged that this earthly existence traps us with illusion, delusion, and suffering. The third and fourth noble truths signpost the way out and present us with the possibility, rather the inevitability of cessation and of emancipation from this veil of tears. We shift our identification with the personality, the lower self, to the higher self, the inner ruler immortal, to quote the Bhagavad Gita. In Thich Nhat Hanh's words, brothers, the third truth is the cessation of suffering. Understanding the truth of life brings about the cessation of every grief and sorrow and gives rise to peace and joy. Brothers, the fourth truth is the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. The noble eightfold path is nourished by living mindfully. Mindfulness leads to concentration and understanding, which liberates you from every pain and sorrow and leads to peace and joy. And equally as lyrically, HPB states, the third is Nirodha, that the crushing out and the extinction of all such feelings, aka misery, pain, and suffering, are possible for a man on the path. And the fourth is Marga, the narrow way, or that path which leads to such a blessed result. To live to benefit mankind is the first step, the voice of the silence tells us. It is insufficient to achieve enlightenment for oneself alone. Just as suffering arises from ignorance of the self, with a capital S, and attachment to personality and form, so the cessation of suffering arises from understanding the self, once again with a capital S, the Atman, the unity of all beings, and the ending of false identification with personality and form. Become the path itself. Some ideas. Not by striving forward, but by releasing the one who thinks there is somewhere to go. When listening is complete, there is no listener, only hearing. When seeing is clear, there is no seer, only what is. Then action arises without forcing, compassion moves without intention, and direction appears without map. The path is not something you walk. It is what remains when resistance, grasping, and commentary fall away. To become the path itself is to live as presence unfolding, each step already home. As HPB says, our only true course is to let the motive for action be in the action itself, never in its reward. Not to be incited to action by the hope of the result, nor yet to indulge a propensity to inertness. Two paths. Emancipation alone, cessation alone is insufficient, we are told. The Buddhists tell us that motivation is the determining factor in deciding which path we will take. Are we looking for personal liberation or aspiring to return as a bodhisattva for the benefit of all beings? The voice of the silence is written for those who have already accepted the reality of suffering and are consequently working at dismantling the ego self. There is an understanding that liberation requires inner discipline and insight and transcends illusion and selfhood. We are compelled to realize that bodhicitta is the existential cost of awakening once illusion is fully seen through. Bodhicitta transcends self-interest. Therefore, personal liberation alone is incomplete. The bodhisattva accepts responsibility for all beings. Therefore, the path described in the voice of the silence is one of interior sacrifice and renunciation. The vow of bodhicitta is a spiritual resolve that transcends the emotions and the thinking mind. Using the imagery of the sky and the clouds, this path is the sky that notes the clouds without partaking of them, stays calm and peacefully abiding in the great expanse of the higher self. The bodhisattva in this imagery becomes a cosmic watchman. Compassion. Compassion is not a consequence of enlightenment. It is its completion. Enlightenment encompasses the realization that there is no separation, there is no self and other, that all phenomena are interdependent. From this awareness that all phenomena therefore lack any inherent independent existence, compassion naturally arises. There is no linear transaction implicit here. Enlightenment and compassion could be said to be one and the same. Realize emptiness, have compassion, is the great Buddhist aphorism. Bodhicitta is also described as the heart of the awakened mind, the state in which wisdom and compassion are perfectly balanced. This state of wisdom and compassion is realized through the process of deep listening. Deep listening is therefore listening from the very essence of our being, from the one source that is beyond concepts, boundless and immutable. To finish this exploration of the Four Noble Truths and deep listening, I would like to share some verses by Shantideva in the Way of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhicharyavatara, on the excellence of bodhicitta. Those who wish to crush the many sorrows of existence, who wish to quell the pain of living beings, who wish to have experience of a myriad joys, should never turn away from bodhicitta. Since the boundless wisdom of the only guide of beings perfectly examined and perceived its priceless worth, those who wish to leave this state of wandering should hold well to this precious bodhicitta. For when, with irreversible intent, the mind embraces bodhicitta, willing to set free the endless multitudes of beings, in that instant, from that moment on, a great and unremitting stream, a strength of wholesome merit, even during sleep and inattention, rises equal to the vastness of the sky. To them in whom this precious jewel of mind is born, to them I bow. I go for refuge to those springs of happiness who bring their very enemies to perfect bliss. Peace be with you.